Hi there, welcome to another episode of Camera Peeps. Joining us once again is our colleague Andre.
G'day David, how are you?
Good, thank you. Now today we are singling out the topic you specialise in, which is videotapes and old videotapes particularly. What have we got here, Andre?
We've got a 2-inch quadruplex tape here pictured. These we used, this is one of the earliest forms of videotape recording. And basically the TV stations recorded for many years, starting from around about 1960 up until probably the earlier 80s. They started using this format to record most television shows, sporting events.
So in the US, correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm just challenging my TV history memory here, but the Americans pretty much came up with this 2-inch tape system.
They did, yeah.
Ampex?
Yes, Ampex was one of the big pioneers in this, and RCA was another big company.
But Ampex, I think, correct me if I'm wrong once again, the A, the M and the P were someone's initials, I think, and they added X for excellence, or something. That's how that came about.
I can't remember but it's American something, I just can't remember.
And of course this totally revolutionised things in the US because of the East Coast and West Coast.
It was originally developed for time shift recording from New York to Los Angeles, and they simply, the time difference was so great that they had to somehow work out a way of, instead of redoing the whole show for a different market, a way of recording it. They had experimented earlier with fixed head recorders, but the tape speed required was incredibly high and it was a very hard thing to manage. So the Ampex people were one of the people that developed, or I believe the ones that developed the rotary heads, which meant they could slow the tape speed down and they could get a very good picture out of it.
Because the big stars at the time, I know certainly in radio, your Bing Crosbys and your Bob Hopes, they actually used to do many live shows for the different time zones in the US.
That is correct, yes.
So this totally changed everything.
That's right, and there was a 6 to 8 hour time difference, so they needed some way to shift these recordings without having to do the whole show again. So by doing that, they were able to time shift as we know it today and play the tape later as if it were live in another city. So it was quite successful, but it had to be done. So there was further developments made because originally it was a time shift recording medium, but many other uses came out of it.
Yeah, well, shows were basically mastered.
That's right, and they were able to actually re-edit things. And in the early days of editing, they had to physically splice the tape like a film. And then as the technology improved, they were able to electronically edit it from tape to tape, and it became virtually frame accurate.
And it would have saved the TV stations, the networks, money because they were kinescoping everything, so the live shows were...
That's the other thing too.
So it would have been a huge film budget because to record everything.
Prior to that, film costs were enormous and they had to keep running the film to keep up with the tape, and the film got scratched. It was very hard to duplicate, and there was a few other problems as well.
Okay, so here's another shot of a 2-inch tape, and this is from your collection as well.
That is correct. This would have been a spot reel, they called them. It was only about 10 minutes, that one, and that would have been for commercial transfers. So they would have recorded commercial programs on there to replay later to air in television stations. So they might have had like a whole break recorded on that, depending on how the network structured its needs. A lot of these were also run off a cartridge system, which was also that tape put into like a cassette, but that was soon replaced by another more elaborate system later on. Okay,
now I've chosen this photo here because of the freight stickers on the box here. So freight was huge.
Yes, well, the other thing, being on videotape, it was quite easy to shift it from state to state, because back in those days there was not a very sort of consistent way of getting vision from one state to another. There was the coaxial cable came along in the early 60s, which meant they could send programs live up and down, but it didn't leave any room for any other transfer. So the videotapes were very good for shuffling pre-recorded shows from state to state.
And I think this was also the 1970s and the early 1980s was also the glory days of the post-production facilities, because they were basically sending off dubs of commercials to all the regional and capitals.
Yes, I used to actually work in an area that did that for a while. We used to run off a commercial. We might have to do 30 different dubs of the commercial, which would have to be cut down and sent off to all the regional television stations, as there was no networking as such back then.
Amazing. Now these tapes, are getting a bit old. Now, you can't just throw this onto the machine. Now, most people bake cakes. If you work in this area here, you actually have to bake these tapes to get them to a certain...
Well, the problem with the videotapes is they absorb moisture over time. And the term baking simply means that you're absorbing the moisture out of the tape so that you can replay it. In most cases that does happen over time. The other problem is the oxide will shred off the tape. And usually, the biggest problem is when it goes past the video heads, the heads dig out the oxide and it causes what they call a head clog, which means the picture disappears. And you have to patiently go back and try and do it again and see if you can resolve the problem.
Okay. Now, you mentioned oxide. I think there was an industry joke with film people who, my area, left TV so they could go and particularly work in film. And I think there was a joke about the difference between film and tape, and one records onto rust and the other one records onto silver, so therefore
you find that the film people detested the videotape era because of the lack of resolution.
Yeah.
But again, the videotapes are very convenient for doing quick dubs, shifting things around, instant replay, no developing, so you had to really weigh it up. For television, videotape was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
For the rest of the industry, the film was the quality and the medium they used.
So are there many machines around that still play back these 2-inch tapes?
As far as the 2-inch tapes go, very little resources. It's very difficult, as is with a lot of the tape technology. These people that pioneered this system, there's really very few now that are left that can actually do it.
Okay. I actually remember seeing in a documentary on the Vietnam War, they actually had a 2-inch machine in the back of a DC-3, and we're actually transmitting live pictures out of the DC-3 for the troops, for morale, so they could actually show TV shows.
That would have been obviously a very portable machine, which wouldn't have been very portable, I might add.
No, well, I don't think the story wasn't so much about the tape machine, it was the fact that
they could do it.
DC-3 could fly so slowly that it was slow enough to transmit the signal.
Which that would have been incredible at the time.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, and that would have been the maximum size reel, 10 minutes, that would have fitted on that machine.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. All right, so just moving along in terms of technology.
Okay, by about even in the 1960s, they were developing and trying to get the tape smaller. Now, this is a 1-inch tape. This is half the width and half the size, and this is only about 5 minutes.
So Sony pioneered the 1-inch, or
I'm not really too sure who pioneered that, but a few different companies were trying to work on it. It's all about getting things smaller and more compact. So the 1-inch system was developed originally in the late 60s, or around about that time, once they could miniaturise the electronics more, but it wasn't very good quality. It didn't have the quality of the 2-inch.
But also with the 2-inch, you couldn't picture search as such.
No, that's something I'll get to.
Okay, no worries.
The 1-inch format was developed more and more. Now, the machine that's pictured here now, that came out about 1979, 1980, and this revolutionised the 1-inch tape format. So they had an A, B and C tape format. This is a C format machine, and this had the ultimate quality, and it was really very comparable with the 2-inch, if not comparable. So the big advantages of the 1-inch system were the fact that you could pause the picture and get a still frame, and in this case this machine has what they call AST, or dynamic tracking heads, which meant that you could get a clean still frame and slow motion capabilities. The 2-inch machine, because of the layout of the quadruplex heads, it couldn't give a still picture, it couldn't do any picture searching, nothing like that. So the 1-inch machine was quite an improvement on that, and you got extra audio channels.
Okay.
The 2-inch machine only really had one audio channel. Some stereo machines were brought out towards the end of its useful life, but the 1-inch machine was far superior for all these things.
And this particular machine actually resides...
This machine came out of a working TV environment. It used to record broadcast television shows.
But that photo's actually taken in the spare room.
That is actually one of the machines I have, and I have several of these. It is working, yes, and it was only just working the other day, so it is still in functioning condition, but it's a limited amount of time that we'll be able to keep these things running due to the fact that there's no spare parts.
Okay. So this is another, I guess, variation of Sony, I guess in this case, just trying to make things smaller and more efficient.
This is a well-developed U-matic system. This was developed in the very late 60s, getting into about 1970.
I didn't realise it was that old.
It is.
Okay, right.
The original machines were top-loading, and the tapes went into the machine, dropped down inside. This is what they call a front loading, so it could be put in a rack with other machines because you normally wanted more than one. This was the first of the video cassette systems that became commercially available.
This particular, we should just point out, this particular machine is SP. This was actually the last.
It is, yeah. So this was the last of the machines. So after that, they really gave up and developed. So this is the tape that went in. This was actually a portable tape. And David, you'd remember when you were a cameraman at 9, you'd go and
well, look, it sounds...
shoot on this, and I'd get the tape and put it in the editing machine and edit the stories off it.
Well, I hope Channel 9 don't send their security guards around to retrieve the tape. But what happened, and it will sound strange now because everyone has video capability on their phones, but back in the 80s, a lot of people didn't have video cameras, or if they did, they weren't particularly good. But as news camera guys, we actually had, because we were on call, we actually had the car with the gear in it. And our bosses, just so long as we had their blessing, we were allowed to use the gear for, 21sts or family weddings or events, whatever. We did have their blessing, and that is why I still have these tapes. So there's nothing shifty going on there, but it's, to me, I've digitized everything, but I think that's got someone's wedding or something on there.
Yeah, it looks like it.
But it is digitized, but I still struggle to actually throw it out because it's
well, this system actually went for about 20 years successfully, and it was used in the industrial level of things, and in broadcast it was still being used even into the 90s in some companies. So it lasted pretty well.
Well, I digitized that about 4 or 5 years ago from one of your machines that you kindly loaned me, and there was a little bit of breakup at the beginning of the tape, but apart from that, it was actually pretty good.
If the tapes are kept in good condition, they can generally last a while. It's the machinery to play it back is becoming the issue.
The weird thing is, I hadn't really gone out of my way to look after those tapes. They were pretty much stored in the garage, so I've got all the fluctuations in temperature. And they still actually played pretty well, better than the SP tape, the Betacam, which we'll get onto in a minute.
Okay.
So here's just another shot of the.
This was the 20-minute one, and the one that you see pictured there is the 60-minute. Now they both fitted in the same machine, but you got an extra 40 minutes on the bigger tape.
So my recollection of the Channel 9 days were the bigger tapes were for the master edits. So you guys used to black the tape, I think.
That's correct.
And then the stories were just backed up.
That is correct. We edited onto a tape.
Okay.
Yes.
And
that meant that gave flexibility between the vision and the audio whilst editing.
Yeah. And then, so I'll just go back one. And then when the news went to air, there were basically a row of these machines.
Yeah, we had 6 of those.
Yeah.
Even though I was an editor, I sometimes had the job of putting the machines to air, and we used to run down the corridor with seconds to go after editing and push it into the machine, and off we went.
And then my recollection was, so the sequence was you would hit local control,
you would give the machine
then hit
remote,
remote, and then the director in the studio actually rolled the VCR.
And sometimes we had to manually roll and just listen out for the cue.
But I remember at the time, because I think the other networks had actually switched, Channel 9 actually hung on to this system for a long time, but a lot of the other networks had put the beta cart machines in.
Yeah, there was an automatic beta cart, which was basically 4 of these in other format. You could actually get it for that format.
But I think the thinking at the time was that this was actually a fairly good system. It was actually quite reliable.
It was simple and flexible.
Yeah.
That was the whole point. And you could get things up and running on air very quickly, and that was the whole success of that system.
Okay. And then once again, I recall that inside the cassette there was a bit of paper, and you guys wrote the story,
we had the out cue and the duration of the story.
And the initials of the editor.
Correct.
I think, yes.
And I think there's a lot of mine in there.
Okay, right, okay. So that's back to that shot there. So that's the 1 hour, you said?
That is 1 hour, yeah. As in KSP 60. KSP was the grade of the tape, and 60 was the minutes it recorded for. You got a little bit more than that, but 60 was the conservative.
That was the longest. 60 minutes was the longest.
No, they came out with 75 minutes, but the tape was so thin that often it would stretch, and A lot of the machines, if the machine wasn't up to scratch,
Okay.
it would damage the tape.
And I must say, at Channel 9, we had an excellent maintenance department
We
headed by
certainly
John
did.
Bremer, and it was amazing that basically,
Genius.
yeah, when the guys, when they were doing maintenance on these machines, they didn't just fix a capstan or just fix a roller. They basically rebuilt it. Would spend
They basically, like a car engine,
Yeah.
they stripped it down, replaced all the things that needed
Yeah.
to be replaced,
Yeah.
and the machinery ran perfectly.
well, I think that's probably why these machines still work in 2018.
That's probably why.
Okay, so moving up to another format here.
Okay, well, this is a VHS now. This is a professional machine, but VHS in the late 70s started to become into the home consumer market. Now, even though this is a professional machine, it's the same format, and then the format also developed into a SVHS, which was like a higher grade of recording. Even though the tapes were the same, the recordings were different. So this was when the home market started to get competitive with these systems, and there's also a Betamax picture there, which
which we'll go to
its
finish
competitor.
with
yeah,
VHS.
yeah. If
Okay.
we can go to that, right? And that's the competitor. That's a Betamax machine. Now, David, I believe that you purchased one of these at some stage.
That machine actually, well, you're the custodian of it now, but this, I convinced my parents to buy this machine in 1986. I convinced them that it was the better format, and we knew at the time that the video hire places actually did have more movies, more titles in VHS, but I said, no, this is a better machine, and it has hi-fi, it has really good audio.
Yeah.
So I convinced my parents that was the way to go, and as you know, well, neither of
we've
us
got
like
the
to throw
original
anything out.
receipt there for
This
it.
is the original receipt from 1986, and it is for $1,200.
So, in today's money, we're probably talking about $5,000 just to buy something to record off the TV.
I hate to think, but my mother particularly would be very happy knowing that it hasn't been thrown out.
No,
and it's still getting
there.
used.
Well, this is what started the domestic market off, was the VHS and the Betamax. Now, the Betamax, you've got a hi-fi one. The earlier ones didn't have any hi-fi, and the sound was very ordinary. But that format led into the broadcasting area, which, if we go to the next picture, as you can see there, all these different formats were developed from the Betamax system, which originally the Betamax was a smaller version of the U-matic. So they'd simply have made the same technology into a smaller cassette. So that was very attractive, especially to...
Well, I think one of the camcorders is
yeah,
up the
well, that
back
made it very attractive to the
and the
camcorder market, and that...
the grey cassette on the right hand.
Yep, the very...
side of the photo would go into that.
That is correct. That
camcorder
is
there,
the
yeah.
first of the broadcast formats using Betamax, but they called it Betacam, which was the professional version of it. So it meant that the tape ran through faster. So in fact, that 30-minute Betacam would run 3.5 hours on the normal domestic machine, but because it's going so fast, you only get 30 minutes. So that was the start of the new wave of broadcasting tapes. And as you can see there, it developed into...
Can I just stop for a second
sure.
there? I remember some Sony marketing at the time, a glossy brochure, and it was about, now we had camcorders basically, or they were available, and there's actually a photo. I'd love it if someone had a copy of it, because it was actually amazing. Basically a guy on a hang glider with one of those Betacams mounted, so it was basically to say we can get a whole videotape camera before onto the...
Well, prior to that, the U-matic system, there was no hope of... You had to have a separate recorder with a cable going to the camera.
I know, that was my
When
era.
this format came out, as in this one here, this tape would fit inside the camera, which was quite amazing, and you'd get broadcast quality. So that meant that the tape could come straight out of the camera and go in and be edited. So that was revolutionarily good. Anyway, as time went on, they realised they could improve it, so they came out with the Betacam SP, which was superior play or better quality.
Which I think we've got one here.
And that's
the grey
that's,
case.
That's it. Yep. So it looks just the same, but that was just simply a higher grade of recording.
Another home movie on.
Then they moved into the next, which SP came along. Then they moved into the fact that, well, we've got this great machine, can we get more tape out of it? So then a larger tape format was developed. That meant you could get 90 minutes instead of just 30. So that was the SP advantage. And then, of course, it progressed from there, and then it became digital Betacam, which then started to replace the 1-inch tape machine, which meant that you didn't have to have these open reels. You could record as good as this onto this, if not better. It was digital, you didn't lose quality when you were dubbing, and on it went, and you had a lot more flexibility. And then as time went on, the digital Betacam became HD Betacam, and now we pretty much don't use videotape. So that format developed quite significantly in a 20-year period.
I think there will be people watching this who will have memories of all those.
Yeah,
formats.
and even today, most of those tapes play really well, and it has the tapes still pop up from archives, and they've lasted quite well, and until recent years they were still using it as an archiving source.
Yeah, okay.
So it's done pretty well for itself, that system.
Yeah, good. What have we got here? Oh, this is just a shot of a...
That's a SX Betacam. That was a grade under it's only standard definition, but that was a grade under the digital Betacam. This was like a halfway point. It was digital, but it wasn't digital Betacam.
But I do also recall the head life, and because what appealed to the TV stations was the head life. They got a couple of thousand hours, I think, out of the heads on those machines.
And you got double the tape time as well.
Yeah, okay,
so what could be 90 minutes in a digital Betacam or SP actually became 3 hours in one of those. So that's a fair amount of time.
And of course, you could actually use SP tapes in that
could,
machine.
yes.
Yeah.
It would play back those. They were all backwards compatible, those machines. They could play back even right to the early first generation up to they couldn't play back digital Betacam, but it could do that format back.
And you have one of these machines?
I've got several of those machines.
Great.
Yes.
Nice to know. Okay, so once again, the spare room at your place, Andre?
Yeah, that's just a rack that I use. That also incorporates a couple of other formats. So there's a Video 8 format, which is another sort of smaller than this. It's about a third the size of this again, which is basically the same operation, but it was made smaller. But it wasn't very successful because it had a lot of problems with quality dropout. And they even got to a digital format in that Video 8. But that rack is capable of playing back and dubbing all those formats we've just seen.
Okay, now that's a great segue to now, 2018. I have digitised all my tapes because I have the means to, but we are recommending to anyone, any agency or TV person or whatever that has these tapes lying around, that they actually digitise them before it's too late. Is that fair to say?
It's more the fact that the machines can't be kept going forever. And I would say if you want to do it now, because every year it just gets that much harder.
So you basically, check with you first, but you do have, apart from 2-inch, you have most machines.
I have most formats I can cover, domestic and professional. Most people request that they put on either USB sticks, hard drives, to sort of store it, and then they make their own arrangements. It can be captured in different formats depending on what space you want to take up on your hard drive or what the quality of the original is.
But you basically have a service where someone can bring the tape.
Yes.
We can digitise it onto a hard drive or a Vimeo link, private link or something like that.
That is correct.
Back it up. So that's great to know. I've found with TV industry people, they can be a little bit belligerent about paying, because we came from a culture where we didn't have to pay. We could just go in after the news and do a dub or whatever. But it just can't be a free service because this stuff, the electricity alone to run those machines.
It's not just that, it's the fact that it is time consuming.
Yes.
And there are a lot of other factors. If the tapes haven't been well looked after, there's other contributing factors that may mean that you get head clogs and other problems which slow down the process. So it is a major consideration, but it's a consideration you have to look at because in the near future you won't be able to do it.
What's a bit of a crunch decision really people have to make is the footage that important to you?
If you want it, save it.
You better do it sooner rather than later.
Every year it just gets harder and harder.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, I think we'll wrap it up there, Andre. But that's a great video there. I hope people enjoy that. And and on behalf of all of us TV industry people, thank you for going to the effort of retrieving these machines, because I think some of them literally were in the dump or very clse, one step away from the dump
Well, I
master.
retired from service,
Yeah.
a lot of them, and they had to be restored by myself or other people that I had
Yeah.
to engage to do it.
And you had the foresight to grab them, and it is, I guess it's an encumbrance on, your living space as well. So, we do appreciate that you've...
Well, it's a case of people sort of tend to hang on to the tapes and not the machinery and think everyone's going to have one, but as it's turned out, a lot of people have the tapes and there's nothing to play them on, so
But
it's useless.
Yeah, but also I find that, now we're in this HD world and, 4K to a point as well, but the other thing, it is standard def. It's not critical if there's a dropout or whatever. It just doesn't, it's not actually that hard to digitise this stuff.
As long as it's watchable, I think people, if it's old, they accept that, and it's having something is better than having nothing.
Okay, all right. Thanks for coming on,
Pleasure.
Andre, and I think we'll be catching up with you again. Some
All right.
more videos.
Okay.
Thank you.